Keanu Reeves, a name that seems more like a prayer than a simple signature on a contract. More than 50 years walking through Hollywood as if it were a foreign country, never fully adopting its rules, never letting it devour him. The Matrix turned him into a philosopher warrior and grossed more than $1.5 billion. John Wick proved that rage and grief could be transformed into pure art. $380 million in assets. Millions of fans who see him as living proof that kindness still has a place in a cynical world. But behind that friendly demeanor, behind that shy smile and those tired eyes, there is no glamorous life, but a story carved out by hardship. A father who left when he was 3 years old and left a hole that never closed. A best friend who collapsed and died at the age of 23 while Keanu watched helplessly from a distance. A daughter who came into the world silently on Christmas Eve without ever taking a breath. A woman he loved who crashed into parked cars 18 months later, leaving him with a double grief impossible to understand. A sister who battled leukemia for a decade while he put his life on hold to support her. And now, at 60, as he walks the red carpet hand in hand with Alexandra Grant, it's hard not to wonder if this man who lost almost everything has finally found peace, or if he has simply learned to carry pain with more elegance than most of us know how to carry joy. If Keanu Reeves ever made you believe in kindness, in second chances, or in the quiet dignity of moving forward, even when everything seems hopeless, his success is a tribute to a man who proved that gentleness is not weakness, but a rare form of strength. It is devastating when the beginning of a legend is marked not by celebration, but by abandonment. Keanu Charles Reeves was born on September 2, 1964, in Beirut, Lebanon, a city on the brink of instability. A place that already foreshadowed a life without anchors. His name, which in Hawaiian means cool breeze over the Oe mountains, bore the mark of his father's heritage. Samuel Nowlin Reeves Jr., a geologist of Chinese-Hawaiian descent, was an expert at finding valuable minerals, but incapable of keeping basic promises. His mother, Patricia Taylor, an English backup singer and costume designer, had a beauty that was not enough to keep the marriage together. When Keanu was 3 years old, his father disappeared. It wasn't a gradual goodbye, nor a difficult conversation, nor a thoughtful farewell. He just left. He left behind a wife, a son, and sometime later a record for selling heroin at an airport. Keanu would only see him once more in his life, at age 13, in an encounter so fleeting and hollow that it felt like seeing a stranger with the face he had been imagining for decades. And then, nothing. The absence of a father is not just the absence of a body. It is the absence of a role model. It is growing up without knowing how a man is supposed to behave. It is questions that bounce around without answers. It is looking in the mirror and wondering how much of you comes from someone who is now little more than a ghost. Patricia raised her children alone, dragging them from place to place like emotional refugees. Sydney, then New York, then Toronto, where they finally stopped moving, but never stopped feeling temporary. They changed houses and cities so often that home ceased to be a physical place and became a suitcase always at the ready. Their mother married and divorced 3 more times. Each stepfather was a presumed stable figure who one day would also pack his things and leave. Each departure was another lesson in impermanence. Keanu was largely raised by his grandparents and nannies, those invisible figures who fed him while his mother worked, who remembered his birthday when everyone else was exhausted or absent. School, far from being a refuge, became a minefield. He struggled with dyslexia. The letters rebelled against him, refusing to fall into order and make sense. He went through 4 different high schools in 5 years. Among them was an art school from which he was eventually expelled. Years later, he would admit that he was impulsive, that he said things without thinking, that he was not exactly the best-oiled machine in the classroom. But he found a place on the ice. As a hockey goalie, he earned the nickname The Wall. He was so good that he allowed himself to dream of playing professionally. He stood between the goal and the chaos, stopping pucks flying toward him as if his life depended on it. Without knowing it, he was rehearsing the role he would play in his own biography, standing between tragedies and the people he loved, absorbing the blows so that others wouldn't have to. Then theater came along. Or maybe he found it, like someone clinging to a piece of floating wood to keep from sinking. He discovered that on stage he could be anyone but himself. He could walk in other lives, carry other sorrows, and for a few hours, escape the instability of his own. Words ceased to be just lines in a script and became lifelines. From that moment on, Keanu pursued acting not as a shortcut to fame, but as an escape route. Not for glory, but for basic survival. At 17, he dropped out of high school. He went to Los Angeles with some clothes, a handful of hopes, and an almost physical hunger to change his destiny. He took low-paying jobs that left his hands burned and his shoulders bruised. He auditioned for anything. He stood in line with hundreds of identically desperate young people, all dreaming of the same phrase: "You stay." Each no was a small death to add to the list. He shot commercials that no one remembers, roles so small that they barely paid the rent on apartments with walls so thin that he could hear his neighbors' arguments, laughter, and cries while his own life remained on pause. His first film salary was $3,000 for playing a hockey goalie in Youngblood, a role that reflected the boy he had once been. He slept on other people's couches. He stretched cheap sandwiches over several days. He drank water to fool his stomach when hunger pangs struck. There were nights when he wondered if he had made an irreparable mistake. If he should return to Toronto empty-handed, his dreams shattered on the asphalt of Hollywood Boulevard. Then came Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure in the mid-1980s, an absurd comedy about two teenagers who travel through time. Everything indicated that it would be forgettable. But it wasn't. Keanu played Ted Theodore Logan with such disarming sincerity, with such honest sweetness, that the audience fell in love with him without knowing why. The film grossed millions, and suddenly casting directors were uttering his name without hesitation. Doors that had previously been closed began to open. Point Break in 1991, then Speed in 1994. The story of a bus that would explode if it dropped below a certain speed ended up grossing more than $350 million and made him a global action star. After the premiere of Speed, seeing the audience's reaction, he said through tears that he had been reborn that night. He knew that his life had suddenly changed course. But success took its toll. His body was beginning to suffer from the stunts, the falls, the endless hours of filming. His mind was on the verge of exhaustion. In the midst of this whirlwind, River Phoenix appeared. They met in the late 1980s, two delicate souls in the midst of an industry built on appearances. Sensitive, spiritual, allergic to the hollow circus of Hollywood. They bonded over motorcycles, deep conversations, music, and improvised philosophy in the early hours of the morning. When Gus Van Sant offered River a role in My Own Private Idaho, his agent refused to give him the script. Keanu grabbed his '74 Norton Commando and rode more than 1,000 kilometers to River's ranch in Florida, covered in dust, with the script in his backpack. "I'll do it if you do," he said. River accepted. They shot the film in 1991. Between takes, they made plans for the future, fantasized about Shakespeare, and talked about intimate projects away from the spotlight. Years later, Keanu found it almost unbearable to talk about him in the past tense. He described him as fiercely creative, profound, courageous, funny, capable of containing light and darkness at the same time. He was grateful to have known him, but life rarely warns us when it's the last time we'll see someone. On the night of October 31st, 1993, River Phoenix collapsed in front of the Viper Room, a club in West Hollywood. He had taken a lethal mixture of cocaine and opiates. He died on the sidewalk, aged 23. Keanu was filming Speed when he received the news. His co-star Sandra Bullock would later recall how she saw him break down, crying silently. He said he was a private person, but it was impossible not to feel the intensity of his pain. Seeing a man like him allow tears to flow made him even more human in the eyes of those around him. Keanu fell into a depression that made him feel like he was drowning without water around him. For a while, he remained motionless, paralyzed, wondering if any of it made sense. The movies, the posters, the money, the applause, which seemed grotesque when your best friend dies on a sidewalk. He began to question success, fame, the usefulness of everything in a world where the life of someone so brilliant could end so cruelly. Some wear their pain like a visible flag. He carried it silently, moving forward without making a sound, because stopping meant sinking. But life wasn't done with him yet. He thought River's death was the final blow, that he had already hit rock bottom. He would discover that suffering knows no ceiling. Years before River died, even before reaching the peak of fame, another battle was brewing. His sister Kim was diagnosed with leukemia in the early 1990s. For almost a decade, Keanu became her primary caregiver. He sold his house to move closer, invested millions in treatments, prepared medication, cooked, accompanied her to every appointment, held her hand when the pain became unbearable. She was always there for me. I will always be there for her, he said. When The Matrix made him a multimillionaire, he donated tens of millions of dollars to blood cancer research and founded a private organization without his name on the front. He didn't want credit, just results. Eventually, Kim went into remission. She survived. Keanu learned then that sometimes, just sometimes, sustained love can tip the scales in favor of life. Then came 1999. The Matrix burst onto the scene like a cultural earthquake. It grossed over $100 million and elevated him to the Olympus of the highest-paid stars on the planet. While the world typecast him as the chosen one, he was living another parallel story. He met Jennifer Syme, a 28-year-old woman who was intelligent, sensitive, and had invisible wounds that Keanu recognized as his own. There was a connection. There was complicity. By the end of that year, Jennifer was 8 months pregnant. The baby would be named Ava Archer Syme Reeves. They prepared a room. There were tiny clothes folded in a drawer, toys waiting for little hands. But on Christmas Eve, Jennifer went into labor, and Ava was stillborn. She never breathed. She never opened her eyes. She died before she lived. It's a kind of pain that's hard to describe. It's not just saying goodbye to someone, but saying goodbye to an entire future that only existed in the imagination. Keanu and Jennifer tried to stay together, clinging to each other in the darkness. But grief can be a third person in a relationship, claiming space, demanding attention, distorting every conversation. They didn't break up because they stopped loving each other. They broke up because every time they looked at each other, they saw Ava's absence. They saw the empty room. They returned again and again to Christmas Eve. They remained friends because what else could they be? They were the only two beings on Earth who understood exactly that particular kind of emptiness. Suffering seemed determined to repeat patterns. River dead at 23, Ava dead at birth, and a year and a half later, another blow would come. On April 2, 2001, Jennifer left a party at Marilyn Manson's house. She took her Jeep Grand Cherokee in the early hours of the morning. She wasn't wearing a seatbelt. She lost control of the car and crashed into several parked vehicles. The police found drugs and pills at the scene. She was partially ejected from the car and died instantly. She was 28 years old. The day before, Keanu and Jennifer had had lunch together. When he was told what had happened, he called the coroner's office. He asked in a hollow voice if it was true. He offered to identify her body, but they told him it wasn't necessary. Still, he was with her on the last day he could be. He carried the coffin at her funeral. She was buried, next to Ava, in the same cemetery. A mother who never got to be one, and a daughter who never got to live her life. If he hadn't continued working, perhaps the story would have ended in a dangerous silence. Years later, he would say that acting was no longer an escape, but a necessity, the only thing standing between him and nothingness. From time to time, he allowed himself to reflect aloud. Part of his appreciation for life had been born precisely from loss. He said that life is precious, that it is worthwhile even when it hurts. He spoke of grief as someone who had earned a doctorate in it. He explained that pain changes form, but never disappears. That one can only wait for it to evolve, to transform into something a little more bearable, into a shared memory rather than pure heartbreak. In a television interview, when asked what he believed happened after death, he fell silent. He thought calmly, without pretense, and he replied that the only thing he knew for sure was that the people who love us will miss us. It wasn't a clever phrase. It wasn't an elaborate philosophical reflection. It was the simple answer of someone who has experienced missing and being missed as the only real form of immortality. Over time, someone different from the partners the public would expect from a star of that stature appeared at his side. With Alexandra Grant, he did not find a movie-like romance, but a companionship based on creativity, respect, and slow building. They met and collaborated for years before showing themselves as a couple. First, they were friends, partners in art projects and illustrated books. Then, discreetly, they joined paths. When they walk together on a red carpet, they do not look like two celebrities playing out someone else's script. They look like two adults who have lived long enough to value calm. They do not complete each other, as romantic cliches repeat. They accompany each other as two whole people who choose to share space. She has her own career, her own style, her own voice. Their relationship is not based on public spectacle, but on everyday gestures, long conversations, artistic collaborations, mutual support in projects that seek not only money, but meaning. They don't need to prove anything to the cameras. They are simply there, side by side. Their story together is proof that it is never too late to start over, even with scars. The man who for years took all the blows alone now shares the weight of his life with someone who has understood that healing is not forgetting, but learning to breathe through the scars. They collaborate on books, exhibitions, and artistic initiatives. They attend gallery openings and support other creators. They live soberly despite their enormous fortune. They prefer experience to ostentation. At 60, Keanu Reeves has become something that hardly fits into any category. He is a superstar without arrogance, an immensely wealthy man with no need to flaunt his power. His net worth is estimated at hundreds of millions, but his home remains relatively modest by Hollywood standards. He doesn't have endless fleets of luxury cars or private jets waiting in a hangar. He doesn't surround himself with towering walls just to make himself inaccessible. He is still seen using public transportation, giving up his seat, listening to the stories of strangers. He buys food for homeless people. He gives motorcycles to stunt teams who have risked their lives alongside him. He hands out generous bonuses to people on the team whose names he has taken the trouble to learn. John Wick became another multi-million-dollar franchise, cementing him as one of the kings of contemporary action cinema. He voices animated characters, writes comics, and co-founded a custom motorcycle company. But when people talk about him, the same idea comes up again and again. It's not what he has that defines him, but how he treats others, how he makes people who cross his path feel, the kindness he offers when no one is recording him. On more than one occasion, he has said that he doesn't need to surround himself with too many things to feel grateful, that it's enough for him to open his eyes in the morning and still be here. He often repeats a simple phrase: he is happy to still be here, to be able to look around and say to himself, almost in a whisper, that he is glad to have woken up to another day. The applause fades. The trophies gather dust on a shelf. Box office figures are forgotten or replaced by even bigger ones. But the way we choose to lighten someone's load, even when our own seems unbearable, leaves a mark. From Beirut to Hollywood. From abandonment to the discovery that loving, even knowing it hurts, is worth it. From the hockey goalie nicknamed The Wall to the man who quietly absorbs some of the pain of the world around him. His life reminds us that surviving is not the same as living, but sometimes it is a necessary requirement to get to a better place. That kindness is a decision made every day, often against the tide. That wealth means nothing if it is not turned into something useful for others. That pain, however devastating, can sharpen empathy in a world that confuses kindness with weakness. If this story has moved you, you can leave your own small tribute. Remember a moment when one of his films, an interview, or a simple gesture captured on camera reminded you that there is still room for humanity amid the noise. Honor a man who, without calling himself a hero, has shown that true heroism is not always about defeating impossible villains, but about continuing to choose compassion when everything invites you to do the opposite. And wherever you are today, may you have the strength to cry without shame when you need to continue loving, even knowing that loss is inevitable, to be kind even when it seems futile, and that tomorrow, when you open your eyes, you can tell yourself, without grand speeches, that you are glad to be here. Because if Keanu Reeves has walked through hell time and time again and still finds reasons to believe in something like heaven, maybe you can find yours too.